Good afternoon. My name is Marcia Stromgren, and you have tuned in to Just the Facts. I have in my studio today Phillip Charles Parrish. He's running for the governor of Minnesota, and I want to welcome him in today and welcome you for tuning in.
Thank you.
Phil, I'd like you to start out and tell the viewers a little bit about yourself. You've got quite a bio here, and so I'll just let you tell the folks about yourself, some of your background, a little bit of your history here, and your family, and then why are you running for governor?
Very good. I'm born and raised in Minnesota. I went to school in West Concord, Minnesota. I was very active in school, sports, music, and I went to college to be a teacher. I taught school for over 13 years, and then I became a principal and director of education. And I was principal at Girard Academy, Union Dominion School in Austin for 6 years. In the midst of that, I'm also a Navy reservist, and I'm an intelligence specialist as enlisted, and then became commissioned officer in intelligence as well. And through the years, the Navy has dominated my career in the last 9 years especially, and I've done quite a bit of work in Europe, and I've been to Afghanistan. I've worked for Special Forces, and recently I was placed in D.C. I'm currently done with my active duty tours, and I'm home running for governor. My motivation is centered around my work as a principal and teacher, and a lot of motivation from especially the last 4 or 5 years in intelligence career. I have an ethic that tells me that if you are aware of wrongdoings, things that are not right, that you are complicit or accountable for not saying something. Something I learned from my mother, my father, just a good person in southern Minnesota. A lot of good people taught me from a very young age that we are accountable for our behaviors, and something that we witness or see, we're probably as guilty or more guilty than the perpetrator if we don't say something.
I've been put in positions like that myself, and you do wonder what will be the ramifications of when you do say something, but you really should think about the ramifications overall if you don't say something. Well, tell us a little bit about one of these schools that you were the principal of. I understand from what I read was something that about children with autism.
Yes, New Dominion School in Austin, Minnesota is part of Girard treatment programs, Girard Academy, and it's a residential facility that helps a lot with emotional and behavioral disorders. Students there have an opportunity to try and make life work, even though life has kind of failed in many different ways. And there's a lot of wonderful people there working very, very hard. Education in general is a passion of mine. I was not that student that was like voted most, apt to succeed. I was that child that was tall, lanky, a bit embarrassed. Luckily, I had sports and music to kind of keep me really active, so I felt a little bit successful. And otherwise, academically, at the time, I probably wasn't voted to be the most person to succeed in the class. I was basically, in some ways, a C student in high school. And then after going to undergraduate and graduate school, eventually, I can do this, and was able to. So, but it's a wonderful place. And young people who are struggling. I just recently, after coming back from orders, my last set of orders, I've been able to do a substitute teaching while I'm trying to get a principal job. And it's been a lot of fun because I have forgotten how much I miss that, even if it's one student here and there, where you can really look them in the eye and kind of, you can see that you have an opportunity to inspire them. Life can be okay. You can do this. And even if one person catches on to that for a bit, it kind of makes the day worthwhile. So it's a real passion of mine.
Well, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I just want to say this. I know a bit about autism and the effects that it has on children's lives and that. So this school was not specifically for them, but it included that challenge of mentally needy children. But then what other types? Were they coming from abusive homes and things like that as well, where they were taken away by the county and put into these residential center, or what were some of the other makeup of the children?
Yeah, at Girard programs in general and at New Dominion School, students are often on their way to a juvenile detention and or other correctional measures, or oftentimes are coming out from or trying to transition back to public school systems. So Girard has found very successful ways at trying to help students transition. Some students have literally gone through the trauma of being removed from homes, being placed in foster care. Foster care sometimes worked out, sometimes didn't, and have many interventions in the public school, and then public schools get involved with helping to find a program. It's a very dynamic environment there because you're working with, as a principal, I was working with social services, corrections, public school employees, and representatives of the student, guardians, parents. All of those groups are pulled together, clinical workers and psychologists and psychiatrists and stuff like that, depending on the medication. So a very wide, very eye-opening. It's probably one of the most powerful 7 years of my life that I've had, and it's actually been very applicable to a lot of my work. As silly as that might sound to some people, a lot of my work, even as a military intelligence officer, in how I am able to successfully, when called upon, successfully investigate a situation and or analyze data and present solutions or observations that has been pretty unique and have gotten some credibility with my colleagues, because again, as silly as it may sound, a lot of that working with people and troubled situations has been very applicable to a lot of my work in the military.
Well, that's very interesting. Now I know I've never heard of the Girard School, so 2 questions. Okay, is the one that you were working with the only one that's in the state of Minnesota? And since there is a wide spectrum of problems up here in northern Minnesota, not strangely enough, not different than anything that you've worked with. But one of the school board members that I work very closely with, they're foster care parents, and they take children that have been mentally compromised because the mother was on drugs when she was carrying the child. So they've had some pretty tough cases, and really there's no place up here for these children to go back to except into the foster care system, and this is grievous to them because some of these kids are really compromised. I mean, the anger and the terror within some of these children, they really need special people to handle them. I think that's what you're dealing with, apparently. So does Girard try to establish schools in other parts of the state of Minnesota then, or are they national, or how? What is? Tell me a little bit about that organization.
The program that I was involved with in Austin, Minnesota, initially was an independent program that a group of very wonderful people got together and had. My colleagues will probably correct me. I believe there were three different schools in their initial inception of the program. One was in Iowa, and I believe there was 2 in Minnesota. There might have been one in Chicago or in the Illinois area. Again, I'd have to read the history again to remind myself. However, at some point then, Nexus Corporation, which is a program that has a head office in the Twin Cities area, I haven't been able to talk with them in the last few years because I've been overseas on duty, but Nexus has several programs in the state. I don't know the status of all those programs at the moment,
Okay.
but again, it was wonderful people trying to do exactly what you've just mentioned with regards to trying to meet the needs of students from a wide variety of challenges. So there are programs out there. They are trying to maintain them and grow them. It has been difficult. It hasn't been the primary notion as to my motivation to run for governor, but it's obviously a big passion of mine. Some stuff that happened with our legislation that, well, rightly so. There were a few programs in Minnesota, I would have to say in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, there were some programs in Minnesota that needed to go. And the State Department got on top of that. And however, like most things that we've experienced in life, the pendulum tends to swing too far. So I was actually called to answer some questions and provide my feedback several times by some very good colleagues in the State Department of Education. And I was pretty blunt with them. And some of them I won over and some of them I didn't, because they didn't want to hear some of the contrary opinion. But I'm so passionate about it that I'm not afraid to say, well, you might have a point in this program or that program, but you need to understand this is the implications of your decision and the legislation that was coming along. It was pretty troubling at times. So
it's funded by the state then, too, that you've answered one of my questions, is it?
Yeah, well, that was part of the controversy in the late 90s and early 2000s, is these private programs were essentially having the money travel with the child. And the money coming from the taxpayers, the taxpayers, people need to be accountable to you. They need to be respectful of, mom and dad, single mom, married mom, single dad, married dad, guardians, people who are paying the taxes day in and day out. These programs need to be accountable to the taxpayer. So in a sense, the State Department of Education and legislators were doing a good thing in some programs that weren't being very accountable, because tax dollars were following the child to the program, and the program, as much as, I'll say right up front for a baseline, I am not a fan of the Federal Department of Education. And I am not a fan of our bloated adult constituency in even our state, that if you were to take every adult that's involved with education in our state, and including the union and the union members and the union staff, if you were to take all the adults involved, you could have almost a 1-to-2 ratio. I mean, could you imagine the problems we could solve with more adult actual interaction with adults with children? But yet, year after year after year, we have to have more money, and there's less people in contact, direct teaching the children, and there's more and more people in this. I mean, someone has to come along and say, wow, what are we actually doing here? And I can say this because I'm down on the street, born and raised in the midst of it, all the way to becoming a teacher, all the way to becoming an academic. So I can criticize our academics because I'm an academic. And I'm asking academics to start questioning themselves and their logic, because they've lost the logic in logic.
They've lost the focus of why they are. And I told you earlier that I have monitored the 709 school district for, well, I didn't tell you it was 8 years. And I am just flabbergasted. I mean, I don't know how many words I could use to describe my frustration with what is going on and who is suffering. The kids. The kids and their parents. And these parents were suffering before they had their children, and they're at a point where you've got parents that can't even help their children with education anymore, like my parents could do, because they had good education. Education has gone down the wrong road. What do? We throw more money at it. But that's not getting to the bottom of the problem. Right. So I totally agree with you on that point. Well, tell me a little bit about your family. Do they support you in your endeavor to run for governor? And just say a little bit about your family.
Yeah, I have a very diverse family. Many of my family are my grandfather who passed away. Lloyd Parrish was DFL of the DFLers. I mean, he was a very hardworking, salt of the earth. In quite frankly, if you were to reflect on it today, more of a tied to the Constitution and freedom and liberty. So all the way to I have family and friends who are the conservative of the conservatives. And somewhere in the midst of that, I've developed this Jeffersonian, constitutionalist, libertarian type. Leave people alone. Leave them alone. And let them grow and learn. We are free to screw things up all the way to mess it up, or we're free to succeed and get out of their way and let them learn.
So that's called limited government, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's tied to being a parent. One of when I speak to especially young people, one of the things I love to talk about is this notion that as being a parent, it's my responsibility to raise a young person that is able to do for themselves and grow and learn and change and meet life's challenges. If I do everything for them, if I create a codependent environment where they are no longer, and like our leaders now, we're in this euphoric notion that government can solve all the problems, then when this codependent, sick environment is all infested with all these notions, what happens when things aren't working? There's no critical thinking, there's no asking questions, and it starts to break down. So leaders need to take on some ownership and be accountable to the people that you are to be a true leader and work yourself out of a job so that other people are growing and mentoring and coming up into leadership roles. So I got off track of the family question, but...
Well, you're going in the right direction, so now tell me about your family in that respect.
So my mother and father, father was a teacher. My mother did a lot of work in nursing homes. She ended up, I believe probably her most favorite career was working in nursing homes of handicapped adults. And so she's a very passionate, very hardworking person. I like to say that, she was that tax-paying person that I really love to identify with. Mom and dad, all races, creed, you name it, but they're getting up every day, working day in and day out, paying their taxes. They're not throwing stones through windows. They're not starting on fires. They're getting involved with their community, and they're trying to be a productive and positive person. And so my mom is a huge inspiration. My dad's a teacher and farmer. So Minnesota is really special to me because I've lived, eat, sleep, bled, suffered, sweated in the fields and in the factories. I even drove truck in the 5-state area for a while. So a very diverse family. Mom and dad are pretty special to me. We were a broken home.
That's too bad.
But so currently, my wife Victoria and 6 children because of some tragedies in our family. Both my family separately from hers, some very sad tragedies for both. And we kind of pulled life together like everybody else and tried to make life work. And so there were a blended family of 6 children and 2 granddaughters. So.
And 2 granddaughters are living with you?
The granddaughters are, because of so much work in the U.S. and overseas, actually our oldest 2 are still in England at the moment.
Oh.
And so we've spent so much time in Europe that Victoria and our oldest have unlimited leave to remain in England for the moment. They may stay, they may come home, but that's the life that they had for quite a while after their father was tragically passed away.
So in the jobs that you've done, it sounds to me like the teaching and the principal area was one of your passions. What made you think that you wanted to run for a elected position? Have you run before in the past for an electoral position? And the governor is a big piece of pie to chew on, to say the least. I mean, it is an enormous task. Why the gubernatorial race maybe stay instead of a state race or a smaller, something smaller? What is your thoughts on that?
I have run for office before. The most prominent run was the 2014 election where I ran for U.S. Senate against Al Franken.
Okay.
Mike McFadden got the nomination at the state convention. Very interesting, though, it was a springboard into a lot of interest from Republicans, Libertarians, Tea Party, Constitutionalists, actually former DFLers, and some current DFLers. Really a lot of interest got created about my run in 2014. That has springboarded into some of my notions and some of my support in the recent few months here. My primary reason for running then was to do with, again, exposure to knowledge of situations that were happening in D.C. that I couldn't go to sleep. I literally could not sleep at night about, especially stemming from Benghazi, because I am one of those people who have direct knowledge of what did and did not happen in Benghazi.
I see.
And those are things that I couldn't live with. But I'm not a Snowden, I'm not a Manning, I'm not necessarily a big WikiLeaks proponent, because there are legal ways to go about getting after these people who are corrupt, these people who are committing crimes against our communities. There are legal ways to do it. And people need to stand up and start taking legal measures to confront criminal activity. And so I chose the governor race after a lot of deliberation, sending some emails out to a lot of trusted and supporting friends, and just getting feedback. I love to listen. If there's one thing I want people to someday reflect on, hey, I remember, yeah, Phillip was a really good listener. That would just warm my heart. 20, 30 years from now, if someone says he was a good listener and he made good decisions because he was a good listener, that will be a prize to me. So we have some very, very serious security concerns in Minnesota. And I am really motivated to discuss and bring to the table discussion about these security concerns that I don't hear the rest of our possible people running talking about at all. And I don't hear Governor Dayton talking about it at all. And we have senators, Republican and Democrat, that are not talking about what I believe to be very serious issues. And my exposure, because of my work in intelligence and the work that I did in Washington, D.C., and the work that I did in Europe, I have a pretty unique experience and background and exposure to things that we have to find a better way to talk about and have everyone start having dialogue. And this whole, just follow along because somebody told you to follow along attitude or culture that we're in, we can still be nice people. We can still be wonderful, nice people in Minnesota, and we are. We are good people in Minnesota. But we need to step back and take a deep breath and decide whether or not we're being nice or are we being enablers. And I think, quite frankly, we have some things going on in Minnesota that we're enabling activities that if everyone had an honest dialogue about front companies, shell companies, money laundering, direct funding of extremist organizations that's coming right from money from the state of Minnesota, from state programs and federal dollars that are going right through a laundering system that goes straight to extremist groups. If everybody started having an honest conversation, especially our leaders in legislation, we'd have something to talk about. So,
well, what do you think then are, say, let's start with three, maybe we'll have time for more than that, but let's start with three top issues that you want to focus on?
The primary is security, because the whole notion of for example, just take one element of it. The whole notion of a sanctuary city is an easy conversation to have with people on both sides of the discussion, from my vantage point. Because and especially with Minnesotans, because we are caring and generous people. If you have the honest conversation, you're not caring for immigrants. You're not caring for those who are seeking refuge. You're not caring for a former Muslim or a former Islamist or a former member of a communist community or a former Iranian or a former Russian. You're not caring for them by having a sanctuary city. They came to us because they wanted security. They wanted the safety of our laws. They wanted to be included. And what our cities and municipalities in our state has done, whether people want to talk about it or not, you've allowed the very people that are abusing them and killing them, you've allowed those same people into their communities here to terrorize them further. And it doesn't make any sense. And many people like yourself, myself, thousands of people like me in Minnesota are saying the same thing. So I'm saying stand up. Have that voice. And stop accepting this narrative that is completely unacceptable. It's unacceptable to say that you're caring for someone in one breath and then in another breath allowing the perpetrators, the actual people that are harming them, to infiltrate their communities, and they can call themselves whatever they want. They can call themselves a religious term, they can call themselves jihadists, they can call themselves whatever term you want to call them. The bottom line is they're trying to get, the people who in genuine need are trying to get away from the abuser. They're not asking for the abuser to come in and be essentially coddled and allowed to, enabled to continue their violence. So it's a very strange, so that's part of the aspect. The other thing that's going on, we have a situation where everyone's talking about and seeing in the paper all the time with regards to taxes and with regards to budget and with regard to programs. Again, we have to really start asking about some common sense and just break it down to being a family member. If you are a mom and a dad or parents or guardians, you're trying to care for your family, and you create a situation where you are so enabling your children and so creating this false utopia for them that they cannot function outside of that utopia. I know that sounds like a very minute example, but it's the exact same principle. You have a bunch of legislators demonstrating such disrespect. Because here's, again, from my vantage point, from my mother. She worked hard, 2 or 3 jobs, never complained, never, she's not a saint. I mean, she's obviously tired and angry at times. But, I think about her when I see some of these bloated politicians and these bloated programs, and the waste, fraud, and abuse is something that I've specialized in and confronted within our Department of Defense. The level of disrespect demonstrated towards a taxpayer should be shocking to everyone. You are being exploited.
Yes.
And the notion that people are sitting around the Capitol just willy-nilly, yeah, we'll spend this, we'll spend that, we'll create some new programs. That money doesn't belong to you, sir.
No.
Mr. Dayton, Governor Dayton, that money doesn't belong to you. That's the taxpayers' money. And you had better start demonstrating some respect, sir, for the taxpayer, because that is a problem that all of our leaders, they should be leaders, not politicians, all of our servant leaders, and they should be servant leaders, need to get straight and start demonstrating respect for the taxpayer, because they're living at the grace of the taxpayer.
Couldn't have said it better. I'm going to go back to your first topic. What you see happening in the raising of children and enabling them to become the ones that throw the rocks and cause the riots and all that kind of stuff, it is the parent's responsibility to raise up that child in the right way to go so that when he is old, he will be a responsible citizen. He will be putting back into life, which, however he affects others, his responsible attitude. Too often, children out of the womb are given anything and everything. They never appreciate anything. They don't know the value of anything. And they go to school, and they're enabled in school, and they're given their rights, and their parents can go take a flying leap in the next river, and then they get in government, and they do the very same thing with our tax dollars. I've seen it all these years. I mean, I home educated my children, and I kept them out of, for the most part, a lot of the modern ideology, which just floors me because it's so self-centered and meistic, narcissistic. That's what started in the 70s, and I saw it. I saw it when I had my son in a private Catholic school, and I railed against it because my parents both were hardworking. My dad was a Navy man, and he was injured. And so, you know, he never finished school, a hardworking man. My mother worked as well. And so I saw a work ethic come from my parents. But I had responsibilities at home, another thing kids don't have anymore, because they're little princesses and little princes, and you just do everything for them because you don't want to have them be burdened with anything. You want everything to be hunky-dory. That mindset goes on in the schools. And so, yes, they grow up and then they become elected officials and they just give away everything else. I know that only too well. And the tax issue, I know that only too well, being a business owner. I am to the point where, okay, if I don't increase the way I can get income coming onto my business without having to go get a loan to go put in more buildings, which is, with our economy today, that is really kind of a dangerous zone to go into. I hesitate. Yep. Because my taxes continually go up. And so what happened to that relief that we were supposed to get last year, Governor Dayton and you Republicans and Democrats who are finagling your figures down there? Now we have this huge surplus, and Dayton is going to try and spend it every which way he can. And I know from being in two different cities that light rail doesn't work, and I get it from my son who lives in Coon Rapids. Light rail is never full. So why are we focusing on light rail? Why are we focusing on these things that really have been proven to not work in other communities? So I'm totally in agreement with what you're saying. So let's talk about topic number 3 and see what you have to say on what is one of the other major issues that trouble you.
Well, yeah, we're digging into a rabbit hole here of multiple issues with regards to decision making in our centralized government. One of the key issues I put in my opening is much like the Met Council. There's other officials who are unelected officials who are making decisions that impact the entire state. Again, we're talking about a level of disrespect to taxpayers that is shocking and should be shocking, and it's troubling to me that more people aren't shocked by that. When you have groups of people who are unelected officials making recommendations and decisions that affect the entire state, and it's no representation of the taxpayer at all. So, like you've mentioned, you have several programs, not just the light rail, but lists of programs that are not functioning, despite what the press wants to tell you, despite what the legislators want to put on their little cue card about all their success. They are not. The light rail, for example, taxpayers are funding that to the tune of something like $42 a day per trip. So in other words, if someone using the light rail to get to and from, the taxpayer is paying 20 some odd dollars per trip. So almost $40 or more than $40 per day per person to subsidize the light rail. Yet trying to to boast it as a success and or boast it as a something that we need to do more of. So you have to break it down, and I hate to keep using the family analogy, but if I'm running a family and I'm trying to get our household to succeed and have children that grow up to be responsible and productive citizens, why on earth would I be allowed, well, I could be allowed, but I'd be a failing father, a failing parent, to create a dynamic, a situation where we're clearly losing money, bleeding money, subsidizing some venture, some idea, and we have no way to sustain it. And then, by the way, I'm going to lie to the family and say, oh yeah, we'll be fine. And then 10 years, 20 years, 30 years later, bankrupt, children have nothing, they have a codependent family who are sick and then end up on the street because I was irresponsible, dishonest, and disrespectful, is what it boils down to. So again, it's about policies and agendas that if you were really to step back and be honest about the policies and agendas, you have to start asking yourself, why do you even think you have the authority to maintain programs like that are failing and lie to the taxpayer about it? It's shocking.
I guess what shocks me more than anything, Phil, is these so-called Republicans. And I'm going to pick on them because that was my latest venue. I mean, it was my last venue of the big political parties before I became a constitutionalist and started reading, and learning from men that understood what the whole foundation of the Constitution is. They get together and they make their decisions because their comrade thinks it's a good idea rather than freely thinking. Like I told you, I'm part of the LEA, and Bruce Anderson, he's been there all along as a strict constitutionalist. And he's frustrated because most of his colleagues have given up the fight and moved on to something more rewarding than being in government. And so we get these people that are elected. They talk a good line, and they act like you and I are talking right now about wanting to do it better, and yet they get into the quagmire. What happens to them? What is going on? Are they threatened? Is there a lot of pressure from the unions? I mean, I'm not down there in St. Paul, so until I'm able to be down there at some point and get a feel for what's going on, I sit up here, and of course we have the most liberal news media up here that doesn't tell us anything worthwhile. So how does a person know who's in outstate? Like my son knows what's going on because he's down there, he's in Coon Rapids, but how do we know what's really behind the scenes or what's really going on and what is happening to these people? Yeah. They make these promises, they get in there, and they do what?
Yeah, well, a lot of it, again, because of my exposure to investigations and knowledge of schemes. Now, schemes can be a word that has a genuine effect in the sense that to reach a goal or objective, I come up with a plan to get there. But it's interesting to me how the word scheme is so closely verbally connected to the word scam. So how does the scheme to get to a point actually turn into a scam? What happens in my personal experience from the intelligence perspective and from working with public school systems, bless our hearts, very hardworking people, and the majority of people are really trying hard. If you're a teacher, you're not a teacher for money. You're not going to school to teach. If you're a teacher, a genuine teacher, you're doing it because you have a genuine compassion and love for learning and growing and helping others learn. But as much as one example using education, you get in a situation where, almost like this budget issue going on right now at the Capitol. Well, if we have it, we have to use it, or we're going to lose it. And you hear this phrase, this shocking phrase. My first time I heard this phrase as a young teacher, I'm thinking about my mother paying her taxes and my father working, teaching and working on the farm. And I'm thinking to myself, You have to use it or you're going to lose it, because then next year it won't be a part of the budget, and then we won't be. So you just randomly give me your list of things to spend so that we make sure we use. Now, this doesn't just happen in education.
No.
This happens in DOD. This happens in the Department of State. This happens in all throughout all of our organized, allegedly government organizations. And so what happens? Some of it's literally financial. You get people so tied to corporations and agendas, much like the Affordable Care Act. I wrote a piece in 2011 about the Affordable Care Act that didn't get much attention. It's a very humble piece. But in my article, I repeatedly was telling people all the Affordable Care Act did at the time was a premeditated exploitation of moving the investment schemes from a very wealthy group of people to a whole nother very wealthy group of people. The investment scheme and how it affects the market, whether it's statewide or national, the investment scheme quickly becomes a scam, because they're not. It would be a scheme, a true plan to move forward if those involved with being taxed were openly included with and had full knowledge of something we used to call due process, knowledge of what is happening and why. But it becomes a scam because why? Because the people who, much like you heard on national TV, see, we got it through because if the American people knew what we were up to, they never would have voted for it.
You vote first, and then you look at the bill afterwards.
You're admitting to me that you purposefully withheld information. You know what we call that? If you and I would go to jail for that, called fraud.
Yeah.
So,
it's okay for them to be fraudulent, but not us.
Yeah, we would go to prison. So, what happens? I mean, because I've known some really good people that for me, I've sat back and said, goodness gracious, what is really going on that you can't get across what you promised on the campaign trail? I mean, I'm not a stupid person. I'm a pragmatic person. I understand that there has to be some give and take. But I think some of it is literally that some of them are so connected to the money, and money becomes such a burden to them that they make bad decisions. It's almost like you were talking about, you're taking another loan now to get another building, only to end up paying more taxes, only to end up paying more, and getting yourself wrapped around more and more. I mean, these are the things that we need to get rid of. We need to free up people, get out of people's way. Yes, is it true there's going to be people that exploit the system? Well, guess what? Do you know where those people go? They directly gravitate towards government programs because they're sharper and smarter than the people that created the program, and they embed themselves in the program for the purpose of exploiting the funding. This is not a new notion. This is something we've talked about for a long time. In history, I am not the person that has come up with that. We have thousands, hundreds and hundreds of years of people trying to tell the public, when you create government programs, the slickest, sickest people are watching and smelling the environment and lining themselves up to exploit the program. That's what they do. And
well, when I was in the position on the township government, which is the closest to the people, I said more often than not, let us be careful what we vote for, folks. Let us be very careful what decisions we make that are going to have long-reaching ramifications. Well, I got caught in my own situation because we had looked at other townships and they only had a clerk, treasurer, singular person. So we decided to get rid of the treasurer. She really was kind of a manipulative person and really causing a bit of problems. So I went around and I campaigned to make this a clerk-treasurer position. Lo and behold, the fire department got a bunch of grants. And because we didn't have the clerk-treasurer check and balance anymore. We had to have an audit. The company took us for a ride. They were disgusting. And we paid for that audit, which over a period of time, the amount of money we paid for that audit would have taken care of that treasurer's position for umpteen years out. So, bad support on my part. Learned a big, hard lesson from that. I then had to eat my words and realize, yes, be extremely careful what you're voting for and what you're supporting, because there's something you may not be seeing that's in your blind spot, and you have to be careful. That's what I've seen with government passing this and passing that. Another little silly thing, I was up the dump a couple days ago, and people can bring things there and then they recycle them back for free. People can come and pick them up. Well, I picked up some plastic flower pots and some trays. I had a sign of form with my name and address, and I said, what is the meaning of this? Well, we don't want to be liable for anything that might happen to you from anything you pick up from us for free. Yeah. And I'm sitting there thinking, let's see, plastic flower pots and plastic trays for gardening. You want to tell me where there could be a possible liability issue here? Yeah. It's government. It's government getting into every little thing and trying to protect everybody from every little thing, because as you said, there will be somebody that will figure out how to sue and get back at that particular entity that you're working with and get something out of it. And now, how bad is it? How bad is it in America that this is the kind of thinking we are in? That
No, exactly.
It's rampant.
Right. It's a perfect example, and you can use that example in across the board, in lists and lists and lists of examples of the minute you create anything where you're using tax dollars to subsidize, grow, change, work towards, you're going to have to start considering the implications of having to be accountable for that. So it's interesting that there's a real accountability notion, but then as they have that notion, they're not considering the fact that, well, maybe we shouldn't have created the program in the first place.
Exactly.
Okay, so again, you're talking, and I'm criticizing academics right now because I can do that because I'm an academic as well as a pragmatic realist. Academics have blood on their hands in many ways.
Rightly so.
Because you are selling a theology, quite frankly, an ideology that is creating codependent, sick communities. And what I mean by sick communities is where we have these situations that someone might have had a genuine, nice notion, but what happens in the end? There's a complete ignoring of this percentage of the population, basic human fact, the human condition, that are waking up every day and the only thing on their minds is to cause harm. And as hard as that is for us to believe in Midwestern culture, especially that, basically all people are good. And you know what? I've been a teacher for, 13 years, administrator for 7. I've been working in education for over 27 years. I've been an intelligence officer for 19. I am here to tell you there's a percentage of the people in our population, no matter what they want to call themselves or align themselves with, they're waking up every single day trying to cause you harm. And until you accept that reality, you are not going to create healthy communities. We're not going to heal. We're not going to get our facts straight. We're not going to have a factual press. We're not going to have factual academics until you accept the fact that there's a percentage of people waking up every day trying to cause you harm.
That is a very sad thing from the idyllic, I would say, childhood and growing up that I experienced. I'm 70, and so I got a couple more years on you.
I was one of them. My first 3 years of teaching, one of my colleagues took me aside and said, Phillip, you understand what's happening here. Oh, no, that just can't be. Kids don't act like that. 50 year teaching, okay.
You got it, huh?
I got it, Mrs. Anderson, got it. You don't need to explain it anymore. The light bulb went on, and so.
Well, I was blown away many years ago, and this is Hermantown School District, right? It's just up over the hill here. I had a good relationship with this fellow. He used to sell fruits and vegetables on a corner, and I'd go by all the time. So I'd stop in and talk to Bill, and he had his kids at Hermantown. Now, my oldest will be 50, well, he's 49 this year. So it was about the same time as my children were growing up, and I had him in a private school, and his were in public school. The parents were called to the school. The parents stood around the outside of that gym perimeter, and the kids sat in the middle. When he told me that, I went, there's something wrong with this picture. You're standing and they're sitting? And there was a couple of policemen at the door. In other words, you are going to stay here until this is over with. The administration read the rights of the children to them in front of the parents, and my mouth was like, I do not believe this. This is too hard for me to swallow. But it's true. Yeah. It's absolutely true. So if parents wonder why a kid gets to a certain age and becomes really rebellious, let's look at this system these kids are in today. And I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, and the change of the Common Core is ruining the kids' education. The teachers are struggling with the academic. They're teaching to test. I mean, a teacher's position is nothing like what my teachers experienced. And bless their hearts, I wish I respected them more. I wish I had listened more carefully. I can't go back, but I had good teachers, and I did get a good education, CB student, but, they were putting their life, their all, into that education, and I am thanking them for it to this day. And I am a product of their teaching and their education, and my parents backed up everything they did. I couldn't go home and say, oh, Mrs. Anderson did this or said that to me, and they didn't run down to the school and chew out Mrs. Anderson. They would say, you deserved it, pay attention, and be respectful. And you didn't go in there with an attitude and an action that you could get away with anything.
Yeah. Well, here again,
and that's different.
Yeah, you touched on a very important part that I have lived through. We have lived through. The fact is that we have wonderful people that have attempted to solve very challenging problems of abuse and neglect. So many of those notions and agendas are very genuine to an extent. But again, you have to come back to a more pragmatic approach, a reality to the fact that 90% of parents, even during the worst cases in the worst communities, were doing the right thing. So this percentage, this small percentage of people that are so abusive and neglectful and inappropriate with their children, you're going to change the entire program that was working. You're going to change the entire thing to, and so again, you're talking about a utopic idea that might have had some genuine roots to it, some genuine interest, but eventually then morphs into, well, no parents are good. And the school district is the only one that knows better, or the State Department, or the federal government. And all of a sudden, you've been sold this progressive. The next time you have a progressive ask you about their progressive agenda or preach their progressive, I just want you to ask them, excuse me, what are we progressing to? Isn't it interesting how they never define what they're progressing to? I like to be a person, again, of due process that likes to know if I'm going to get to a point, a successful point, I want to know what that vision is. It's amazing to me that people sell these notions with no clear definition of what they're working towards. So although there was some genuine interest in, helping families that were neglectful, abusive, violent, we've morphed into this situation where all parents are basically bad. Isn't that a curious idea? I mean, we've gone from this where you and I grew up where all people are basically good to now we have state-run programs and federal-run programs where all parents are basically bad. Again, I'm questioning academics, and I'm telling academics you need to do a better job about talking about the human condition and what's really going on.
Well, and I appreciate that. I think that's a good summation of the educational system, and we just got a few minutes left. The reason I exited public education is because they treated me like, when I had a concern, it was legitimate. Todd should not have been in school at 5. He was just 5. He should have been held back. But why wouldn't they let him out? I didn't find that out until a few years later. They'd have lost their dollars. Well, they should have lost. If I'd have been a smart enough parent back then, they should have lost their dollars, and I should have kept him home one more year. He had a new baby brother. He'd been an only child for 5 years, and he was sort of misplaced in my heart because I had to take care of this new baby brother of his. And, you know, children don't mean to be that way, but we are all narcissistic, selfish entities when you think about it.
Right.
And so he was a little child, and he got displaced. But, you know, if he'd been home with his mother for another year and his dad, he would have probably developed much better. He had the thinking and reasoning skills of a 9th grade kid. I had him tested. So he wasn't dumb. He just was not ready emotionally. And I think a lot of these children, put them in at 5, they're not emotionally ready. That's another thing I want to see changed. You don't have to be in school till 7 in a state law. We just don't pay attention to it. And kids didn't used to go to school until they were about 7 or 8 years of age. And they bloomed and they did well, fine and dandy. But now we've got a mega system that wants to control that child from the time you birth it out of the womb till 21 years of age, and we've got a mess. We've really got a mess. If you are elected to the gubernatorial position, I will be glad to be down in St. Paul more often, putting my voice in, because I think we've got a mess, and it's affected our society for 30 or more years now.
Yes.
We've got to change that.
Yes.
So appreciate your coming in today, and if you just have one last word or two to the public, I appreciate you.
Yeah, get out there and start talking. Start asking questions. Start asking hard questions. Don't accept the narrative as it is. It's not accurate. You're being lied to and exploited in so many ways. But you know what? There's hope. I've spoke with some young people recently that just blew me away. We're talking junior high kids that came up with a few questions and responses for me that just, I was almost in tears because it was right on track. And I thought, where did they start? I'm not sure. I don't know if it was the last election cycle or what it was, but social media, talking, get out there and talk. Have a conversation with each other. If you want me to come and visit, I'll come and visit as best I can, as often as possible.
Well, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure meeting you and talking to you.
And you as well.
Thanks for tuning in today.
Thank you.